skeptical listeners might say, well, merit is just the imaginary constructions of an oppressive patriarchy. Let's say you screen for SATs to let people into medical school, or the MCAT. Okay, the MCATs are basically tests of general cognitive ability. Okay, there's no difference between that and intelligence. And so intelligence isn't merit in relationship to doctors if you think it's okay for doctors to be stupid. Right, it's as simple as that. And the data on such prediction shows clearly this is the most powerful statistical result in the social sciences. There is nothing that predicts long-term success in complex jobs than general cognitive ability. It predicts 5 times better than the next best predictor, which is conscientiousness, which also these pikers don't assess. And to generate a contrary proclamation, you have to presume that there's no such thing as intelligence, and that intelligence has no bearing on the performance of physicians. So that's preposterous. And then you also have to overlook the fact that cognitive tests themselves were first early used on a broad level by socialists in the UK, who believed that if you could screen alienated populations, poorer populations, for general cognitive ability, you could open the door to their advancement in the school system in the UK, and you could give the deserving poor their opportunity to move upward and benefit society by doing so, which happened. Same thing happened in the armed forces in the United States. So the general cognitive tests were actually a means of social mobility for the very oppressed that the bloody leftists are always clamoring about, right? And so then the third thing you have to accept, if you're going to swallow this DEI nonsense, is that if you dispense with merit, objectively assessed, then what you get is greater equity. But the historical data show that there are 3 standard means of providing access to desirable jobs in any society. There's merit, there's dynasty, so family membership starts to become important, and there's nepotism, who you know. That's it, those 3. Dispense with merit, you get nepotism and dynasty. Okay, so what does Harvard do to elide this system? They use false measures of so-called personality to racially gerrymander their selection criteria. That's that far away from nepotism, right? Because someone in that organization is making a subjective judgment about fit. And as soon as you have subjective judgment instead of objective data, you open the door to corruption and you destroy the universities, the medical system, and the psychological training system, and then children's lives, and then patients' lives, right? So that's where we are. Yeah.
I love that phrase, racially gerrymandering. And we've seen the devastation that this has had on the UCLA Medical School, where the shelf exams, these standardized exams that are taken throughout the course of medical school, their pass rates have just plummeted at UCLA. And they're waving their hands saying, you know, we need to get rid of these shelf exams.
Of course we do. Of course we do. You get rid of merited. Well, look, one of the ways of understanding this practically and psychologically is that this is actually an assault on merit itself. And you might ask yourself, well, who wants to launch an assault on merit? And the answer is people who lack merit, because they can get access to the storehouses of value that were merit defined in the absence of merit, especially if they're in a position to pull the levers of power and decide who gets in and who doesn't. Right. So it's an inversion of the merit structure, and the universities are to blame for this. I saw my own psychology department at the University of Toronto suspended the GRE for selection of students for a couple of years, because then they figured out what the hell happened, right? Even though, like, if you're a psychologist and you're so daft that you don't know that there's a higher correlation between general cognitive ability and performance in complex tasks, then you know nothing, right? That's a psychometrically unassailable fact. And if you dispute that, It was discovered, that fact was discovered by the statisticians who established all the statistics that the social and medical sciences use. So if you deny that elementary fact, you pretty much have to throw the whole bloody enterprise out the window. And of course, they're perfectly willing to do that.